bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, Episode 2. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran. Today's episode brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. On today's episode, a special interview with a gun store owner directly impacted by Seattle's gun violence tax, and we'll be talking about preparing your family for concealed carry. All that's straight ahead on Armed Lutheran Radio. As some of you may know, January 1st, a new gun violence tax went into effect in Seattle, Washington. This was pushed last fall by the city council and passed unanimously 8-0 by that body. It is supposedly, according to the city council's website, designed to mitigate some of the, quote, public health impacts caused by gun violence in Seattle. The revenue proceeds from the tax will be dedicated to gun violence prevention programs and research in order to improve gun safety in our neighborhoods. They say, a couple of paragraphs down from here, it's difficult to predict the total dollars this tax will raise because it is a new tax. However, the city's tax authorities broadly estimate that the gun violence tax will raise between $300,000 and $500,000 annually. Well, I have no idea how they get those numbers, and I could not find it on their website. So I sent an email to the city council. They referred me back to their website without specifically pointing out where this information is located. So to me, it sounds like it's BS, as most statistics thrown out by gun banners are. It's probably just made up out of whole cloth. The state of Washington has preemption laws, but this is kind of a crafty way to get around it. According to the FAQ page on the city council's website, the state does put forward limitations on regulations imposed by local governments, but taxation and regulation are viewed legally as distinct functions. We're not taxing gun owners, we're taxing gun sellers, and it is their decision whether or not to pass along some of their tax to the buyer, says the website. And in light of the success of the firearms industry today, a $25 per firearm tax is not going to affect the sales of firearms, which shows you just how little these morons know about the retail gun sales in this country. They don't know jack squat, but let's be honest, this really isn't about raising tax revenue or fighting gun violence or improving people's lives. This is really a bunch of anti-gun statists who just want to get rid of all the gun stores in their city. That's really all it's about. And if you look at the website and see the pictures of, the half dozen or maybe a dozen little grannies walking around with their signs and all the granolas championing this gun violence tax, you'll understand that's really what it's all about. Does the gun violence tax place an unfair burden on lawful gun dealers and gun owners? No, says the website. It's perfectly reasonable to expect industries that produce and distribute products with broad public health impacts to help mitigate those impacts. So that's all a bunch of BS, and anybody with half an ounce of sense would know that. Basically, the tax boils down to this. It's $25 per firearm, 2 cents per round of ammunition for 22 caliber or less, and or smaller, and then 5 cents per round of ammunition for all other ammunition sold at retail within the city limits of Seattle. Now, immediately after this passed, kind of a historic first, Second Amendment Foundation, the NRA, and NSSF all collaborated on a lawsuit to overturn this this tax. Of course, SAF has been very successful at fighting cities that try to undermine preemption laws in their states, and they'd hope to do that here. Of course, this didn't stop the local county or the King County Superior Court judge from denying their request for an injunction. They said Superior Court Judge Palmer Robinson says the tax does not violate state law and is, quote, a lawful exercise of Seattle's taxing authority. Of course, he is a lib, just like the city council, and he is, of course, anti-gun, just like they are. So, of course, that's what he's going to say, and he's a local judge, so I suspect on appeal this is going to change. But right now, that tax is in effect, pending some further action in the courts. Of course, in response, City Council President Tim Burgess says the tax is a legitimate and appropriate way to raise revenue for gun safety research and prevention programs. He says Judge Robinson saw through the NRA's distorted efforts to put gun industry profits ahead of public safety. BS. Anyway, so we are going to hear from somebody today who is directly affected by this tax and can tell us exactly what it's like on the ground in Seattle, how this tax is going to affect gun buyers, how this tax is going to affect him. His name is Sergey Solyanik. He is a Microsoft developer. He was educated at the Moscow Institute of Technology. He is a gun guy, interestingly enough, a techie and a gun guy, and he owns Precise Shooter, a gun store in Seattle, Washington, and as a result of this tax, he is moving his business out of Seattle to nearby Linwood because he says he can't make any money selling guns and ammunition in the city of Seattle anymore, and so he's not going to pay this tax. He is going to move, and we're going to hear from him coming up right after the break here on Armed Lutheran Radio, so stick around.
Help support Armed Lutheran Radio. Visit www.patreon.com/Armed Lutheran and become a sponsor today.
I am now excited to be joined by the owner and operator of a gun store in Seattle who is directly affected by this new gun violence tax, and he's doing something about it. Sergey Solyanik, he is a Microsoft developer. He was educated at the Moscow Institute of Technology. He is now a gun guy and a gun store owner, and I am excited to have him with me for today's show. I was just sort of reading through all of the information that the city has provided. I even sent them an email and tried to get a little information about, how they came to the estimates about how much money they expect they're going to raise. And
I can tell you that. They published this. If you look at my website, preciseshooter.com, in the library section.
Okay.
There's a bunch of references to the interviews that city quote-unquote leaders have given to press, and they actually explain how they arrived at the estimate. What they did was they They took the total number of FFLs in the state of Washington, and of course,
Which is what?
I don't know if you know, but vast majority of FFLs, there is about 100,000 FFLs in the United States. I can give you exact number because they're all in my database. Um,
And there's 22. They say there's 22 inside the city of Seattle, but
there's 22 inside the city of Seattle, but vast majority of FFLs aren't actually active gun sellers. They're
right,
gunsmiths have FFLs. There's
right,
many kitchen table, as we call them, FFLs that basically just do internet transfers.
right.
The actual number of kind of active retail gun counters at the time of the of when they just started with this silly proposal was, I think, about 5. and and vast majority of them, like, okay, so of this 5, no, there's probably more. There's probably about 8, right? So I think there was my store. There was an equally large store. The store itself is actually far larger than mine, but the size of their gun counter is the same as mine.
Okay.
Called Outdoor Emporium. So they're on south side of Seattle. I am on the north side of Seattle. And then there were three really small locations. 2 of them are pawn shops, and one is a gun store in theory, but it's very, very tiny. Just to give you a reference of what the relative sizes mean, is that I have about 600 guns in stock. At any given time. Outdoor Emporium has about 600 guns as well, and then the smaller locations would have about 40, right? So they're more than the order of magnitude smaller. So 2 medium-sized stores, nowhere near Cabela's, kind of similar to what we have outside Seattle, slightly smaller than many stores outside Seattle, nowhere near large sellers.
Okay.
And then 3 really small, and then about 3 big fives, which don't sell handguns, and have very, very marginal sales in general. Also, typical big five would have about 50 guns in stock, all shotguns,
right,
and some rifles. So that's sort of the landscape. So they took the average, basically, then they got the number of transactions that are performed every month in the state of Washington, or every year in the state of Washington, and they divided one number by their other, getting the average, quote unquote, number of transactions per dealer. And then they said, okay, we'll multiply this by the 22, and that would be the number of gun sales that's happening in the store. So the analogy that I have for this is that if you take 100 people off the street, and one of them happens to be Bill Gates, and you compute the average salaries, and you say, well, it must be true that a random 10 people out of this 100 have an average income of $10 million a month. That's basically the reasoning of the city of Seattle, and this is sort of a statistics 101 thing, right? So,
right.
And I do know that for a fact that the Seattle finance director, his name is Glenn Lee. He went to college, so he for sure he knows that this is absolute. It's actually even worse, right? So by doing this calculation, you can sort of quote unquote estimate the average, though this estimation is nowhere near correct. In the case of state of Washington, vast majority of sales are handled by large, 2 Cabela's certainly, surpassing gun sales everything that ever can happen near Seattle, right? So,
Right.
so applying that average is the same. Applying the average to everyone while having Cabela's in the mix is essentially the same as applying the average to a group of people while having Bill Gates in the mix. But it gets better, right? It gets better. So you can arrive at one number, right?
Right.
Which would be the average. Also, it's not an expected average for a subset. You cannot arrive at the interval. And if you look at what the city number says, it's from 300 to 500.
Right.
So where they get the interval, they cannot explain. Right? It's impossible. They just took a large number, and subtracted and added 100,000 to them, but they don't know, right? There is no way to actually estimate the confidence interval without knowing the distribution.
Yep.
And don't know the distribution.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting is it's that typical liberal sort of static analysis thing where you just assume that if I pass a tax, I'm always going to be able to collect that amount of money because people are always going to pay it. That it's not going to affect their behavior, and that they're not going to seek ways to avoid paying that tax.
Of course, right? Of course, and it is a that's an economic reasoning. Right, but again, just mathematically, it's pure right?
Exactly.
And let's not pretend that city finance department does not understand it. They absolutely do. The fact is that Burgess, the council president of the council,
right,
just went to the city and got them to lie for them, and that actually is the scary thing here. The city turns out to be so incredibly corrupt that professional wing will willingly lie for the political wing just to cover their tracks.
Mm.
If you look at how Burgess set it up, he did everything perfect, right? He is completely blameless. He went to the professionals, quote unquote, in the city finance and got the number from there, and then he went to professionals, quote unquote, from the city legal office, right, to the city attorney,
mm-hmm.
and he got it covered there, and then they even went and picked up a judge who was sympathetic to their cause and got the judge to certify it, right? So
Judge Palmer Robinson, right?
Yes. So politically, everything has been done fantastically well, right?
Right. I thought this was very crafty because the way you avoid the state's preemption laws is you go at it through taxation and say, well, look, we have the right to tax within our jurisdiction.
Which of course is a complete right, because let's say this will not happen in Seattle, but let's say I am in some small city in Alabama, right, and I decide that, and let's say the community leader there decides that, we don't like books that contain swear words. You can't outright ban them because of the First Amendment, but the precedent that the judge has just created in Seattle is that you can tax them.
Right.
So let's create a morality fund and tax all the city at every sale of the book at 20 cents per swear word. That is essentially the precedent that they created legally.
Yes, exactly.
And the judge certified this, right? So of course there's no ways this is going to stand on appeal the moment it gets out of the city. And you have to understand the terminology. The Superior Court of King County is the lowest court that is responsible for this, and of course it is it appears to be under complete control of Burgess and its electable position. So I imagine the standards, typical political corruption with campaign donations, which organizations will forward to the judge when it's time for her to be reelected next year, right? So the moment it gets out of here, it's going to get straightened down because there is just no way this
Right.
can stand. It's the precedent is that you can use taxation as a form of regulation is just too sweeping.
Right, exactly. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of our interview with Sergey Solyanik from Precise Shooter in Seattle, Washington, right after this.
So, you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can find in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cook's holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside the waistband carry. They offer a limited warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster. Choose cooksholsters.com.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
And welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. We continue with our interview with Sergey Solyanik from Precise Shooter in Seattle, Washington.
We have, we actually don't have an epidemic of violence in the city, but we certainly do have an epidemic of property crime. It's going crazy. It's different neighborhoods in the city are now starting to band together to basically hire private security in forcing neighborhoods because police will never show up would just not show up to investigate property crimes.
There have only been 131 firearms deaths in King County, 131 a year since 2000, or from 2006 to 2010, and 2/3 of those are suicide.
Yeah, of course. And if you actually look specifically in Seattle, what the firearms related deaths really are, you will discover that most of them are gang members shooting each other.
And those guys are not coming into your store to buy guns.
No, not at all. I've never seen one because they know what the result will be. They're not going to get the firearms there.
Right. And so the tax is basically taxing you as a store owner for the actions of criminals.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's some sort of a collective punishment, which for some reason politicians in this country consider appropriate.
So talk about moving your store. What you decided? One of the things that is mentioned in this article that I read from a quote from the NRA related to the judge's ruling this month was that gun buyers are going to go outside the city to buy their guns and buy their ammunition to avoid the tax. So you're taking your store outside the city to avoid paying the tax.
I'm not alone. I think pretty much everybody who sells guns or ammunition in Seattle understands that it's impossible to do business, which is, by the way, again, city knew that. They don't, again, let's not pretend that they're really expected to make money on it.
No.
They completely understand what happens. Their goal was to run gun businesses out of the city. That's what's happened. That's what they wanted to do, and that's exactly what's happening.
Right. They can't come out and do it directly, so let's just tax you out of business.
Right. Because it simply makes it economically impossible to sell guns there. I cannot raise prices because people simply buy on the internet.
Right.
Again, remember, there's just 20 tiny kitchen table FFLs who would do internet transfers for $25.
Right.
So and people sell guns on the internet almost at cost. But I can't raise the prices too much, because people are just simply going to be buying there and doing transfers.
Right.
So for ammunition, you have SG Ammo and Lucky Gunners, and there's a bunch of places which sell ammunition cheap. Again, we make money primarily because there's shipping fees. But a cost of 10 millimeter box of 10 millimeter ammunition in my store, at the time we stopped selling it, was $10.99 a box of 50. The tax would add $2.50 to it. I was making essentially, just over $1 and less than $1 if you consider credit card fees on a box. So I certainly cannot swallow any part of this 250.
Right.
I would have to pass it to the customer, and I can't because on the internet that same box of ammunition is sold for $10. So so people would simply start buying there, or they would just go and buy it at the firing range where a box of ammunition would be cheaper than what I would be saying it was the tax, was a price hike caused by the tax.
Right.
So economically it's impossible, which is why everybody would be moving.
So where are you moving? You're just moving right outside the city limit, or?
Yeah, I read the location in Linwood. It's a little bit further. It's not just outside the city limits. It's about 5 miles, I think, outside the city limits. So I do expect that we will win on appeal. So I will have that location, and we'll come back to our current location, and the store is going to be actually well distributed.
Oh, very good. Okay, so you're not selling the existing location. You're just temporarily moving operations.
Correct. And I think what I learned from this is that really, for the company to be stable, we have to have multiple locations in different political jurisdictions, because if politicians and voters go crazy in one of them, we simply have to have a place, another place or another set of places where we were not sufficiently diversified with just one. What we're going to do is we're going to probably have about 4 locations around Seattle, and as a result of all of this. So the funny part, of course, right, is that city of Seattle, this is always happening with the gun control, right?
Right.
Whatever they are trying to accomplish clearly is not working, because every time they introduce some gun control legislation, it just creates more guns, effectively.
Obama is the gun salesman of the year for 7 years straight. That's true.
Yeah, he was. That actually is true. that is true. So again, let's not pretend that they don't understand it, right?
Right.
The problem is not with the politicians. Politicians are crooks. We all know that. There's just they're crooks in every party on both sides. They are exploiting the voters. What we do need is voter education.
Yes.
That I think for gun owners to sort of win, and make sure that we keep our rights. We need to broaden. We need to get voters to understand how the system really works. We need to broaden the tent, which is why I think the gun stores, especially in liberal areas like Seattle, are extremely valuable, because they bring us allies in the areas where previously there weren't as many.
Right. Well, it's been this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and do the interview. I really hope that the move goes well and that you do gangbusters business outside the city limits, and that the expansion goes well.
Enormous amount of mails that we get are of the sorts, we're just waiting for you to move. We're ready to buy our next gun.
Where can they? All right, so they can find you online, and they can still buy from you online, I assume.
Yes, if you are outside the state of Washington, we certainly sell you firearms. This do not the tax does not apply to any of the sales.
Excellent.
So we have a very large selection of Let's Players and Freedom Arms revolvers. So yeah, just visit us online, and we'll be more than happy to help you.
Great, and it's preciseshooter.com, correct?
Shooter.com, yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Sergey. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure doing business with you. It was a pleasure interviewing today. And again, I hope everything goes well with the expansion, and I hope this, on appeal, this crazy tax gets overturned and that you can get back to business in Seattle.
I certainly hope so. Thank you very much. Thank you for your support.
Remember, Armed Lutheran Radio comes with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you are not completely satisfied, the next episode is free.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. You know, you may be considering getting that concealed handgun permit, or maybe you've already gotten it and you've picked out your carry gun, decided how you're going to carry it, you've got the perfect holster picked out. But one thing you maybe haven't considered is your family. Are they ready for you to start carrying a gun? Because carrying a concealed weapon is really about more than just you. When you're out by yourself, you're the only decision maker. You call the shots, so to speak. No pun intended. But when you have family members with you, particularly if you've got children or other adults that aren't trained permit holders, you need to make sure that they know the ropes too, and that they'll follow your lead and that they understand the dangers. The last thing that you really want to have them do is to ignore your commands or question your commands or stray into danger areas or freeze when it comes time for action. So here's what I recommend you do. First off, you need to have a code word that you and your family members instinctively understand to mean danger. Now that code word, if spoken by an armed adult, means don't ask questions, don't panic, drop everything you're doing, and head for the nearest exit. So let's say, for example, you're in a restaurant. You notice a guy with a gun tucked in his pants and he's acting strange. He might be just the worst concealed carry permit holder on earth, or he may be up to no good. If it turns out to be the latter, your family could be in the firing line. So the prudent move would be just to signal that it's time to go, leave your taco dinner on the table, and head to the car and call 911. Now, if you're wrong and it's a false alarm, you've lost the cost of the dinner. If not, and you fail to act, the cost could be worse, could be a lot greater. Children should be taught to act without questioning, because the last thing you really need is to say that code word and then spend the next 5 or 6 minutes playing 20 questions trying to get everybody moving to safety. You need to teach your family the difference between cover and concealment. Now, if you have not taken a tactical or a defensive pistol course, it would be a good idea to do that. But I digress. The class you took to get your concealed carry permit is not enough. Definitely take a defensive or a tactical pistol class. One of the things that you'll learn is the difference between cover and concealment. Cover will stop a bullet, concealment will not. So you can hide behind either one of them, but only one of them is going to shield you if the bullets start flying. Brick or concrete walls, steel doors, vehicle engines, those are good examples of cover. So make sure that you know the difference and that your family knows the difference as well. So when you say that code word I just talked about and you move to the door to get away, you want to make sure that you're putting cover between you and your family and the potential threat and not concealment. The other thing that you need to work on is developing a sense of situational awareness. And this means not just for yourself, but for your family as well. Because most people will go through life completely oblivious to everything that's going on around them. They're paying attention to their cell phone, they're listening to music, they're not really paying attention to the details. If you've ever seen that experiment, we used to do this in high school. I remember that this was done a couple of times. Some kind of a crazy altercation would happen in front of the class, and somebody would come in, they'd tussle, and then they'd run back out. And then the teacher would ask the students, what did you see, and what did you hear, what happened? And only a small fraction of the kids in the class or the witnesses would actually know what happened and get the details correct. Situational awareness means you're paying attention to the details. You're seeing the exits. You know where the cover and the concealment is when you enter a room. You sit with your back to the wall. You sit facing an entrance. You're sitting in aisle seats when you go to the theater. Your family needs to be taught to think the same way that you do. The last thing that you need is to have that argument about where to sit, because your family chooses to sit in a tactically disadvantaged seat at a restaurant. Now, I've done this before, where you sit down, you go to choose a booth at a restaurant, and I'm the one who's carrying, and your wife and kids sit down and put you in a seat where your back is facing the door and you can't see what's going on. That's a little uncomfortable to say, hey, we need to switch seats, but it's better than the potential that something happens and it's happening behind you and you can't see it and do anything about it. So a developed sense of situational awareness will help your family describe events, describe suspects. If you're inside a store dealing with a threat, while your family is outside in safety calling police or flagging police down, they'll need to be able to describe what's going on so that the police get a better idea of what they're dealing with, so that they don't shoot you when they come in, when they arrive. So that's all about situational awareness. You may have developed your sense of situational awareness. You need to work with your kids and with your wife, with your significant other, your spouse, to teach them some of the same sorts of tips and tricks you need to develop their sense of situational awareness as well, so that they're seeing the world in a way that is similar to the way you see it. Part of that situational awareness is identifying exits, finding points of exit, identifying the nearest one to you and your family whenever you enter a store or a restaurant. That way, if you have to use your code word, you want your family moving to that nearest exit, not to the one that's furthest away, and not necessarily to the one that's towards the threat. You need to find alternate exit points. One thing you can do is, while you're sitting down at the table, let's say you're at a restaurant, you can quiz your family. Say, okay, where are the exits? And see if they know without looking. Ask them, hey, that rack of that display case over there, is that cover or is that concealment? Is that wall over there, is that cover or is that concealment? What's the quickest way to get out of here if we needed to? Quiz them to make sure that they know the code words and to see if they're thinking the way you are. And the more that you drill this into them, the more that you quiz them, eventually they're going to start thinking the way that you do. And it'll make things easier in case you ever had to, use that code word and get out of a sticky situation. acting as witnesses. That developed sense of situational awareness will help your family be good witnesses. They also need to know, though, that whatever they say can get them in hot water. Even if you're in the right, whatever you do, in the aftermath of a defensive shooting situation where let's say you draw your weapon, whether you shoot the gun, pull the trigger and fire a round or not, your family needs to stick to the basics and avoid trying to be too helpful when authorities come and ask them what happened. They need to inform the police that they're related to you, tell them they were afraid for their lives, they're willing to, sign a complaint against the perpetrators, they can point out witnesses, they can point out evidence and give basic descriptions of the events, but they need to wait until an attorney's present before they say anything more. Now, when dealing with the police, they need to know how to handle them when they're approached or when approaching them. They need to avoid certain words like gun, as in, Daddy's got a gun. That's not a really smart idea. Nothing will freak a cop out more than hearing, he's got a gun, without the benefit of some context. In most states, you're required to let an officer know that you are a permit holder when approached by police. Your family, however, needs to leave that to you so that you can handle it appropriately. They don't need to be announcing to the police or to the world that you're armed. Certainly not out loud where other people can overhear it or can be taken out of context. The other thing that you need to teach your family, you need to go over with your kids, is how to deal with 911 operators. It was like dealing with the police face to face. Calling 911 and knowing what to say is critical. It's going to be your first contact with law enforcement, more than likely, and it can have some pretty serious implications for you if you're involved in a defensive shooting. So groups like the Home Defense Association of America and others will provide little wallet cards. I remember I used to be a member of that group, and they part of the membership package was a little handy wallet card with instructions for how to handle a defensive shooting situation. And if you're whatever group you're a member of, if they have these similar instructions, be sure to share those instructions with your family so that no matter who makes the call, the instructions are consistent. Tell the operator, we were afraid for our lives. My mom or my dad was forced to defend himself or herself. Please send an ambulance. Don't offer anything more. Don't give them any opinions. Just stay on the line and wait for the police. And then finally, the last piece of advice I can give is just practice. Practice with your family, practice with your kids, practice with your spouse. When I coached football, I used to tell my players, you practice like you play. In other words, you practice like you're playing a game. If you lollygag in practice, you won't be as prepared when game time comes. If you treat every snap like it's 4th and goal and the game's on the line in practice, then you're going to treat it seriously when it's game time. Well, the same's true when it comes to preparing for self-defense situations. It's even more important when you're teaching your family. So take the time to, like I said earlier, take the time to regularly quiz them about the code words, about situations, about where the exits are. Role play situations so that the training sticks. Practice calling 911. Practice, do role play, talking to police. Discuss some of the places that you frequently visit together and talk about challenges that some of those places present and how you would get in and out of those places. Allow your family to pose some questions about different scenarios. Well, what if this happens and what if that happens? If you play through those what ifs in advance and you visualize it in your head, you'll be prepared, or you'll be better prepared for them if something does happen. Look, carrying a concealed handgun is a huge responsibility. You've chosen to be a civilian sheepdog among all the sheep, and that should not be taken lightly. You got to be prepared for any situation and the aftermath. So having some of those sheep as family members, it only complicates things. Your sheep need to be prepared as well, so you can better protect them when the time comes. And that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio.
Be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @ArmedLutheran and like us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/TheArmedLutheran. You can contact us by email at armedlutheranradio@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 855-54-ARMED. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.